Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Whispers of the Deep. My name is Draken. Today we are going over Chapter 11, Ekkin 3. So, Ekkin 3 is back in the Siege of Green Navria subplot, and in this arc, this chapter specifically, we are going to get the first part of the stealth mission into Green Navria. This chapter, as of date, is the longest chapter so far, as will be seen by the length of the recording of the chapter posted on YouTube as well, alongside this video. To give a brief rundown of this chapter, Ekkin and his lieutenants Bruno and Valerius trace the reverse path of Hamak from the prologue, going through the tunnel into the pit. They meet corpse hands. They free corpse hands, though, not without issue. And then on the way to the gate, which they intend on opening to the army of the Empire Noria, they are beset by guards. The fight ends in a decisive victory for Ekkin and Co., though more questions are raised about corpse hands in the process. So this chapter has some things which don't seem quite relevant yet, but will be relevant in the future, and has a few more fun details off on the sides, as per the usual. I had a lot of fun writing this chapter, and without further ado, let's get into the epigraph. So this epigraph is one of the more lore-based epigraphs where it tells us about the royal couriers who essentially serve the Emperor's brow, which is one of the positions of the Red Gold Council. And the couriers, as we gain from this description, are essentially a royal spy network that they are the Emperor's ears. Notably, the Emperor's ears is not, or the Emperor's ears are not a position on the Red Gold Council. The Emperor's ears are the royal couriers, who basically spy around the Empire. However, they lock horns with the Fairclay's protectors at the City Guard and the Lictorial Guard because the Lictorial Guard have a similarity in duty, that the Lictorial Guard and couriers have a similar protectionary service, and then this causes them to basically step on each other's feet and have a rival within the royal bureaucracy. Moreover, that the electorals are predominantly taken from the nobility. However, anyone can become a courier, and this we all learn from Xanthius Tiburcio. Notably, however, the term peace of the gods is from the Latin pax deorum, which represents this sort of Arthurian I am the land type shit, where like the health of the emperor and the piety of the imperial household and the piety of the city of Rome basically creates this sort of cosmic balance, which then results in prosperity throughout the empire. But the peace of the gods is essentially another way of looking at it is also like the mandate of heaven from Chinese history, that the thing the emperor is supposed to do is maintain the peace of the gods, and if they lose the peace of the gods, then they do not have the right to be emperor. This is essentially like the contract that they have is that the emperor is allowed to be above the law and allowed to make the law, and in exchange, the emperor is supposed to give prosperity and maintain the peace of the gods. And we see that the royal couriers and the electoral guard are instruments of this greater will. So, sticking with that classical theme, we open with a Virgil reference. No, to be completely frank, this idea of that soldier bees sharpening their stingers for war is basically just a line from Virgil in his Georgics, where he talks about bees and bee wars, and it's not really biologically something that bees actually do. The joke is also that soldier bees would be worker bees, and worker bees are all female, but Ekkin and his mates are all male. So it's ironic, and this shows that Ekkin is not, this basically has a starting saying Ekkin is not someone who has perfect information, and Ekkin is going to get things wrong. And then we have basically this is the stealth mission, and they are wearing dark clothes, and Ekkin is still wearing armor, and he has two weapons: a dagger, which is used for puncturing necks or getting in between the chinks in armor, and then he has Fortune. And the number of puns going with Fortune's name are quite significant in this chapter, but that's what I wanted. So it would serve him well should Fortune fail him. Fortune failing him being the sword somehow breaking, or just losing Fortune, or just Fortune being Fortune. It's fun. And then Carla says, yes, so what happens if the sword is lost? Which would be a big deal because Fortune is a true orichalcum blade. It is rare. It is priceless. And Ekkin says, in a very nihilistic sense, if I lose the blade, then I'm dead, and I don't have to worry about that now, do I? But to continue with our old Homeric references, things like that, the term of the upper air is used in the Iliad to describe where the gods come from. So, for instance, when the gods come down from Mount Olympus, they were described as going through the upper air. And here we have a herd of clouds because the clouds look like sheep and the sheep are a herd. It's a fun little piece of imagery. But we have the idea we have further introduced this idea of long twilight that for some reason true night in the peak of summer is actually only a couple of hours, and beyond that there's a long twilight in the morning and in the evening where it's gloomy but you can still kind of see things, versus in winter where true night is incredibly long and true day and like true daylight is only a couple hours actually. And then here, to build on this pile of ancient literary references. We have, so outside the Northern Palisade, we have ditches, sharpened stakes, and pitfalls, which fill with even more sharpened stakes, which is the fortifications around Alesia as featured in Book 7 of Caesar's De Bello Gallico. Because why have a fantasy empire based off the Roman Empire if you're not going to go all the way and actually get the details where it matters? We can't just have people walking around legion in like legionnaire armor. We have to have it be important. And then Lucian Ekkin goes to the forest and he finds one of Lord Volp's couriers. That we know the couriers from the upgraph are under Lord Knox. However, some of them have been essentially contracted out to Lord Volp because Lord Volp is historically minded and is able to make use of them more as a more immediate commander in the field. And we also have this idea of the trampled earth, and the forest has been cleared, that there has been a level of ecological impact from this war, it's that the land itself has become scarred. And Icon gives the code word gadfly. It's a reference to something, and they say, "We know who you are, Sir Halster." And the courier speaks with a very rigid way of speech. Now, here we begin a massive, massive illusion or allegory, which the entire chapter is feeding into. To begin with, Ekkin and his guide go through a forest dark, and then show up at the base of a hill with a tree, and we have Bruno and Valerius waiting for him, intercepting him. And so first off, and then Bruno has his claymore's handle is leopard brown, so spotted and brown, and Valerius is described as a wolf. And later they go into the den of a mountain, what appears to be the den of a mountain lion under a hill. So when we combine a hill, a forest dark, a wolf, a leopard, and a lion, we get Canto 1 of Dante's Inferno. And this entire chapter is themed as basically a reference to Dante's Inferno, specifically the idea of the catabasis, the going down into hell. In fact, as we will later see, Ekkin literally thinks of the idea that they are going into hell. So, with that in mind, there's another thing going on, is that Bruno is tall and wide and has a claymore, and also a pair of axes. And then Valerius has two sabers and throwing knives. We have the classic strength build and the classic dex build. Strength and dexterity, I mean, in like an RPG sense. And that's fun. Also, something notable is that Bruno is Ekkin's companion and calls Ekkin captain. Valerius is Ekkin's legate and calls him my lord. And this is the distinction between the two of them. They are both Ekkin's lieutenants, but Valerius is the one who officially holds the position of legate. Bruno is his companion. It's different. Companion in Greek mean like it being hetairos, which is the companions of Alexander's companion cavalry. Of course, with language being language, the female version of hetairos is hetaira, which means high class sex worker, because because sexism is incredibly ingrained in language sometimes. But we learned that Bruno's accent is that he's from a city called Newhold, which was one of many colonies of a place called Theiss, and we will learn more about Theiss in due time. And here we have Ekkin gritting his teeth. This is something he does when he's nervous or angry or just generally having a bad time, as we will see repeatedly throughout this chapter. And we had this idea that you were early, you were early, Sir Halster's arrived exactly when we want, when we wished him to. This could be seen as like a wizard does not arrive early, they arrive precisely when they mean to. So just a little nod to Lord of the Rings right there. And then we have um, uh, Valerius leaning against a tree, looking like a badass. However, we have Ekkin, who he's wearing lots of armor and he feels like a stuffed hen, which is again a diminutive version of the swan of Ekkin's house crest. And then we usually have Ekkin as the ugly duckling, and here we have him as a chicken, but he's trying to be a swan. And then we have Valerius, who moves like a wolf, and he has claws, but his claws are made of steel. It's just fun. And he says, guilty, good courier, shall we? And we get line about overconfidence, and overconfidence does not bode well to missions like this. But Ekkin second guesses himself, and the idea that if they arrive, basically we have it presented. If they're able to succeed in their mission, they will take the city and they will be able to negotiate with pharmacies. If they fail, it's going to be a very hard fought battle and they're probably going to lose. So this mission will decide the war, most like. And then here we have going down into hell. And the courier is incredibly snarky to them, but and Ekkin does not take this well, and then they go down into the dark. Now, the question is like, why did they not be sent earlier? Probably because the courier believes in their mission, or maybe it was just simply an oversight, and that sometimes people aren't as timely as they ought to be. But we are joyless because in Dante's Inferno, the hill is called the Hill of Joy in Canto 1. Now they go down, and we have Ekkin going down, smelling crypts and cellars, and all places he'd love to enter. And this should remind us of Iroh in Iroh 1, going down in the chasm of the crypt, which has its crypt and cellars. So you have this idea that that is a place of the dead. This is a place of the dead, and he thinks of the drums in Dios Twilight Halls, and Dios being the god of the dead. This is them going down to the land of the dead, essentially. And here we have similarly the land of the dead being filled with ancient people with ancient masonry that they're going down into. And we have the Valerius grin. Now, Ekkin does not say what their actual plan is or what Valerius expects to find because, well, we know as the audience that they're going to wind up in the pit unless something dramatic happens, like the floor collapsing underneath them. But we don't really say what the plan is because they're executing the plan and we can gather from context clues. So we have the mirrored imagery of a gigantic snake, which makes us think of the gigantic snake of Hamak's idea going into the pit, and now we have the same imagery going into the pit from the opposite direction. And then the fork, the snakes have forked tongues. It's a fun little wordplay. And Ekkin is claustrophobic. He is not having a good time and he grips his torch harder because it helps him focus. So we also have another callback to the prologue where Ekkin bumps into Valerius because he was matching him step for step, walking right behind him, which is what Hamak feared corpse hands or a imagined associate of corpse hands would be doing at the same time. So again, it's a callback to the prologue. And then Valerius knows that there are tracks. And he only sees the tracks now because the tracks weren't where they were earlier because because Hamak had gone down the path that collapsed. However, there being no tracks on the courier suggests that the courier didn't actually go into the tunnel, and that Volp was able to simply say, "Oh, look, tunnel going under Green Navria's walls." It's probably that related to that thing, and sure enough, it is. Also, but it is a little bit suspicious though. So they go to the wall, and Ekkin loses hope. And this is abandon all hope ye who enter this place, which is over the door of hell in Dante's Inferno. And then we have Valerius guess that they were dancing, but we actually know what it was is Hamak putting the bricks back and forth and turning around a bunch. So looks like dancing after the fact, but oftentimes without the proper context or being able to have this kind of insight, you, when looking at the past, can make mistakes about what the true function or causation of something was, which is a problem in archaeology routinely. Ekkin, however, realizes it's a false wall, but thinks it's a trap because Ekkin is really nervous right now. Bruno, however, walks past, and the mortar's not rotten. This is a turn of phrase, but it gets the idea across. And he taps and is like, "Oh, the bricks will be taken away." And Ekkin is thinking of avalanche because avalanches are loud, greed fortresses are quiet. And Bruno then takes the bricks out, and Ekkin is nervous about it. And then the reason Ekkin puts the bricks in neat piles is so if they need to run, they don't get tripped on the bricks. And then they look through, and here we have essentially the congratulations. We are now in the land of the dead. These are the cages that the dead would be in, and that the souls of the damned would be persisting in perpetuity. However, Ekkin doesn't hear the voices from the cells, he hears the voices from the stone lamenting that which they had lost, which is their bodies. So essentially we have the souls of the dead, the idea that the souls of the dead have infused into the stone and lost their individuality, which mirrors other ideas of the afterlife, such as the masks in the wall, or the idea of cremation, or the idea of basically becoming a collective and losing one's form when they die. This is also similar to the prologue, where we see those massive columns in that sort of dream world, where Hamlet gets pushed into it and loses his identity. There are no guards though, and Ekkin sees that Ekkin is trying to not think of the smell, so it's damp and rot and refuse because it's a prison. It's absolutely squalid. But Bruno saw something Ekkin didn't, and Valeris didn't, and that was a body. The body is corpse hands. So this is you think he's dead. Maybe Ekkin picks up a broken chip of pottery. We get the idea in the prologue that there's pottery because people be using it to drink water, and some people might have broken the pottery to commit self-harm or commit exit game, basically. So maybe this is that's kind of chip of pottery, or maybe it's just that broken pottery is everywhere in the ancient world, and it would be completely believable if there's just a few broken bits and bobs around. But he doesn't throw because he gets reminded of the spirits of the dead. And these are things like the drowned ghost, which lurk by rivers, which is the very archetypal idea of like someone dies and by the river, and their spirit haunts the river, or the blood-starved revenants of cursed kings. Revenants are generally people who die and then come back because they have unfinished business, and it makes sense that they need the blood. The blood is life. And then seven-fingered liches, whose breath cracks stone, whose touch was mortal. So similarly, that the touch causes death, the breath, or rather the emanations from the lich, cause the stone to crack. However, the fact that the lich breathes despite being dead is something that is incredibly unnatural. As for the seven-fingered part, this is not my idea. This is an idea of someone else. But it's this idea that basically, if spells require somatic components of moving the fingers, more fingers means more access to a greater number of spells or types of spells. So the idea that liches or powerful mages would add fingers onto their hands to be able to cast more complex spells. And then we have the encounter with the dead. That if this is the underworld, Ekkin and Co are now talking with a spirit of the dead in the underworld, and the spirit has no the voice has no body so far, but from Corpse Hand's perspective, it's that they are hallucinations, and he is convinced himself that they are not hallucinations. And Ekkin is afraid because the dead are speaking, essentially. And now we have the figure lurching to life, which is like just this the figure lurched to life, their hands pale as marble. That essentially we have corpse hands like on the ground and right, and like his body contorting into now sitting upright. It's meant to be this incredibly just unnatural thing of like imagine like a corpse being resurrected by necromantic power, or like or a dead body moving in ways that it shouldn't be able to by the laws of nature. That this is something unnatural, and this is a something dead that's returning to life. In fact, says in fact says, um, let's see, where is it? Yes, the indeed. I speak as I live. The figures of life, though in this place, that's hard to say for certain. Although it's hard to say I am alive. That Corpse Hands thinks he's alive, but isn't quite sure. And now we have this introduction of basically Valerius and Bruno as the angel and devil on Ekkin's shoulder, where Valerius says, "Get rid of him," and Bruno says, "Help him." And Valerius's first idea is that he's one of them, kill before he raises the alarm. And Corpse Hands immediately switches to High Navrian, to High Norian, and starts spouting off just incredibly eloquent, incredibly eloquent, incredibly detailed speech to basically try and buy time and try and get as much ideas out there to make it so they will save him because Corpse Hands, if he wants to do what he wants to get done, needs to get out of this cell. And he says a man of use, which is compared to a man of no consequence from the prologue. And he, again, with his pale fingers, and Corpse Hands immediately says, "Oh, you're trying to do this. You're trying to seize the city tonight before the arrival of the Knights of Pharnaces," because he knows all of this, because we learned from the prologue. He learned in the prologue that he knows all this. And Ekkin is flabbergasted, and then so Ekkin only says a couple lines, such as, um, maybe, and they're probably above past the crevice up ahead. So Corpse Hands says they were just his imagination, which would suggest he wasn't listening to them. However, Corpse Hands, just from a few lines of dialogue from Ekkin, is able to pinpoint where he's from, what mandate of the Empire he's from, which means that Corpse Hands was paying a lot of attention to Ekkin, or perhaps Corpse Hands knew who Ekkin was already and is just messing with him. But he says you are a Puck, and that riles Ekkin up and says that he's a Hellstride. In other words, most likely Corpse Hands knew Ekkin was a Hellstride immediately, and Scum baited him out by saying he was a Puck in order to get Ekkin to confirm it, and it works. And he's about to tell the names, and Ekkin lets his guard down, is about to tell the names of his lieutenants, and Valerius is like, "Don't give him our names, are you stupid?" And he says, "Who are you?" And but these a bunch of different ideas for what Corpse Hands could be. We don't exactly know. Corpse Hands says he was in the library, looking for something in the library. There is no telling whether or not that's actually true. But Corpse Hands does not answer his question. But and we already have do as he says if you would. The if you would is this the balance is already gone. That Corpse Hands already has a level of power over Ekkin and the others. Think something something. It's like that scene in Silence of the Lambs where Hannibal Lecter is the one behind the bars, but the main character, she's the one not in the cage, but it's framed to be the opposite. It's that sort of thing. So but now we have Ekkin see that there are no dyer's fingers, but still more of a white, all save for the three fingers. However, it should be noted that the fingers on the hands correspond to positions on the Red Gold Council, and the left pointer finger is Magister Nox, the is Lord Nox, the Magister of War, and the right lat and the right ring and left pointer are other fingers, shall we say? So more on that in due time. But he says they call me Corpse Hands until they haven't called me anything, and that's because no one's paid attention to him since 2 nights ago when Halmak disappeared. And Ekkin asks him what his real name was, and he says something of no consequence. This is the same Corpse Hands we're talking about. And sure enough, there is something deeply intriguing yet spooky about Corpse Hands, and that is the vibe we get this entire chapter, that Corpse Hands is up to something. We have no idea what it is, but there is something not right about that man. And Corpse Hands tells the story of Halmak and how he disappeared. He says, "I saw nothing. Nothing had been mine but muddy water for 4 days. Yesterday I had not even that at, so I had to accustom myself to the taste of stone." So by the taste of stone, he means he got his moisture from licking the walls of his cell. The other hand, when he says, "I saw nothing," Corpse Hands is lying through his teeth. We should not trust a thing he's saying. Ekkin is, Bruno is, Valerius, not so much. But we, as the audience, know that Corpse Hands is lying. Why? That is to be seen. But it is very clear, though, that Corpse Hands is not telling the truth. And Bruno, in fact, calls out, this is why didn't they ask about the man, and he says the guards thought he was dead. lacking the waters of life, um, or just water in general. And then the guards were talking. Corpse Hands overheard some things, but Corpse Hands clearly was in the right enough head that something happening yesterday, he thought it was real. So the idea about Corpse Hands saying that thinking Bruno and Valerius and Ekkin were figments of his imagination is probably just completely a lie. And in fact, he says they didn't bother locking the door because why would they? He was dead. But there's also this, again, this playing with this idea that Corpse Hands is a spirit of the dead, and if he is broken out of this prison, he is going to be returned to life. That is going to be a resurrection of sorts, albeit through unnatural means. And we have absolutely not, and why not, which is fun. But also, Corpse Hand, so it says what about this Ekkin, but actually it's Corpse Hand speaking. And we have the comparison of the red gold of his shining eyes to the red gold of Ekkin's blade, that there's a connection between the two of them. And he says, "Release me and I will help you open the gates. The streets are known to me and not unuseful in fight." The phrase "not unuseful" is a poetic device called litotes, which essentially means where you say someone is like not unpretty, when you say they are very pretty, when you mean they are very pretty, or you say they are not unskilled, which means they are incredibly skilled. So he says, "I'm not unuseful," meaning he is very good in a fight, which we will see later is true. And then Valerius says, "We never said it was our mission to open the gates," when it is very clearly their mission to open the gates. And then Corpse Hands rattles off every single one of Tychonotho's titles. We got His Grace, Tychonotho, the Living Saint, Sign of Old Myconaya, Master of the Sky and Altos, which the river Sky is the river Fair Calaison. The Altos is the main river on the eastern part of the Empire Noria. Lord of the Spires is self-explanatory, and Over the Earth, Lord of the Earth is a title we've already heard. And Defender of the Faithful. So Defender of the Faithful actually historically is a term used for the caliph of like the Islamic Caliphate. However, this is because we're using it here because the Empire Noria is a theocracy essentially. That Tychon Otho is the political leader, but he's also the head religious leader, and the actual patriarch of the Temple of the Triarchy is directly underneath him and is in fact a member of the Red Gold Council. So and then he says all these things, and then Valerius Gish gallops and basically says, actually, he only addresses one of the points, which is how do you know it's waterway, and Corpsens, he says in a very poetic way of saying the sun shining deep beneath the earth, which could maybe be about that thing in the prologue, perhaps, but a sun underneath, basically says, oh no, the walls are all like very clearly like worn through centuries of having water flow through them, obviously. And then he stops speaking as like just choose. And we have Angel and Devil on Ekkin's shoulder, and but he says, Valerius says, "A man's speech betrays his character," which is generally true. And he Corpse Hands is more rotten than any I've ever heard. This man is pure evil. He's been evil since the day he was born. But abomination, which is a theme that will become relevant in very, very short order. So Valerius Ekkin says, "Yes, we'll take him once we find the key." They need to find the key. So they go through the little narrow up to the door. Ekkin goes to the door, and the door is not greased. The door scrapes, and Ekkin freaks out. But they see there's only one guard in the barracks, and he's cooking. Let him cook. And we have by what chance. So Ekkin is hearing these things. Halmik is the name of the protagonist in the prologue. However, we do Ekkin as someone who doesn't know Ekkin as someone who doesn't know Navrian terribly well is not translating the guy's speech very well. By whose chance this is probably is like how realistically, and then did wait you is like realistically the guard's probably saying, wait, how did you survive? How'd you get out over there? How'd you like escape our notice or something like that? But he's saying by whose chance, which is probably like a very literal interpretation, a very literal translation of whatever the guard is saying. And Ekkin shanks him with his sword, and the blood wells from the wound and sizzles that hit the hot stones because the blood is falling into the fire. Blood. We have this. Um, this is it's a little bit comedic because Ekkin stabs him in the gut. The guy's dead. He's gonna die, but the guy doesn't die. Instead, he looks at his wound and then raises his spatula in defense, which is very comedic. Not even a weapon versus one of the best weapons in the world. Ekkin stabs him again. He hits the floor with a soft thud. So in ancient literature and like ancient art, the two ways you signify there are three ways you signify someone being dead. Four ways you signify someone being dead usually. Number one is that they do not touch the ground. They're like on an elevated platform, like their feet are on a footstool. This is like an ancient Greek stele. Two is that they literally just have like a symbol next to their head, which is like usually a theta, which just means dead, thanatos, that they're dead. And then the third one is they fall onto the ground, that they were standing and they fall over, and that means they're dead. And the fourth one is they stop speaking or stop breathing, and that also means they're dead. And we get two here where they fall into the ground and then also stop speaking. So he tries to speak, he cannot, and Ekkin is already dissociating. He first is able to see its blood, and now he's not able to recognize it as blood terribly well. And then the guy tries to cross the spear back and lops off the hand, and the hand falls into the flame next to wherever the guy was cooking and starts burning in the flame. And Ekkin then stabs the man again in the thigh and back and breast and neck, which are all cuts of meat, noticeably. But the guy doesn't die because Ekkin is not okay. And the guy's hopping around on the floor, read fish being gutted or animal being butchered, and an ever-growing pool of blood. The Ekkin is just butchering the guy alive. It is horrific. Then each breath of journey, the soldier turned over and looked at him, and he says, Norwegian pig. Pig motif. We'll get to that in a minute. But Fortune's throat and the man speaks no more. He's dead. Or then I can realize how heavily he was breathing the blood on his cloak, that he's now back in reality. And he throws up because he is just disgusted what he's done. And then he tastes the blood accidentally. And here we get this theme that this conflation between blood, pork, and human flesh, and the idea that pork and human flesh, it is said, taste similarly. And this is a motif that we see a couple times in this chapter. So Bruno gives Ekkin a hand because Ekkin is thinking of the hand that he chopped off and is in the fire right now and burning, and that is going to start smelling real fast of pork. He says, "Go for the heart or the head, which are traditionally places you hit to kill." And then Ekkin takes his companion's hand. Valerius bars the door because he's thinking about the mission. And Bruno rummages the dead man's belongings. And Ekkin is just straight up dissociating right now, that he doesn't realize that, like, somewhere in the distance, Fortune's still in his hand. It's not in the distance. Ekkin is not right in the head. And then the sizzling of skin is the whole room begin to take the smell of pork, that the hand cooking in the fire smells like pork. And then Bruno hands Ekkin a massive twisted iron fingers. It's the thing of keys, but he's thinking of fingers because he's thinking of the hand. And in this blood-soaked robe, that's a bloody hand. He's being handed a bloody iron hand. And then they were almost warm, just like a body. And then we should head back, which is a poignant line. We actually don't know who. So when I did the narration, I did it without one of the voices. We do not know who is saying we should head back. It could be Valerius, it could be Bruno, it could be Ekkin. We don't know who says we should head back. But they find Corpse Hens exactly where they left him because Corpse Hens is in a cell. He's not going anywhere. But the fact that it's mentioned alone suggests that Ekkin thought otherwise, that Ekkin was on some level ready to believe that Corpse Hands would have somehow magicked his way out of the cell. But Corpse Hands smiles and Ekkin opens the cell and his joints crack because this is Ekkin resurrecting Corpse Hands. This is Ekkin returning Corpse Hands to life. In fact, that is what Corpse Hands says. And he says also, and I will sacrifice to you until the gods have decided I've given enough. But this is weird because you don't do sacrifice and give honors to other people. You give honors to the gods. So this is this idea of Corpse Hands beginning to lead Ekkin down this path of heresy. But it should be noted that Corpse Hands is also this like definitely evil coded person who's been let out of prison. That's for a biblical reference. This could be seen as similar to, say, Joseph being let out of Pharaoh's dungeon, eventually rising to become the Grand Vizier of all Egypt. Not an evil character, but definitely hated by some. And then for a more fantastical comparison, this is Sauron being let out of the prisons of Numenor, who eventually rises to become Grand Vizier of all Numenor and then turns Numenor towards worship of Morgoth. So we get this idea that this moment of Ekkin deciding to let Corpusens out is something of almost cosmic consequence. That Corpse Hands, whatever he is, whoever he works for, whatever his goal is, has been released back upon the earth. But he's not fully himself yet. We will get to that. So Corpse Hand has been incredibly polished, but now with the promise of food, he shoves past him, and like a vulture, this imagery will be important later, dives towards the fireplace, which we know there are two things in the fireplace. There's the hand, and there's wherever the guy was cooking. And he raises from the skillet a slab of fried bread, bread being the staff of life and still dripping with grease, and begins to devour it. So we have Corpse Hands returning himself to life through the consumption of the food of the living, which is similar to, say, Book 11 of the Odyssey, where Odysseus gives a sacrifice of blood to the spirits of the dead, namely Achilles and Tiresias, and they get somewhat returned to life through this offering. But Corpse Hands is now on this transition, this re-empowering of going from the land of the dead to the land of the living, and is having his life restored to him. What now once in terms of just title, but now in actual substance. And he laughs. And he says, "Stale bread is a delicacy compared to crickets and flies," which the idea is that Corpse Hand was the only food he got was eating crickets and flies off it out of his cell. The flies, I don't want to think about where they came from, but in terms of crickets and flies, the idea of a prisoner who eats crickets and flies is evocative of Renfield, a minor villain from Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula, where Renfield eats lives and consumes lives for the master being Dracula. And Dracula, of course, is a vampire, read fantasy cannibal. So, and of course, in the pan is bacon, pork, and Corpse Hands devours them too. And then Corpse Hands scrambles over to the dead man's body, which is again this sort of callousness, snatches up more bread, tears into chunks, and begins dredging it through the pan of hot grease. That this is incredibly this is a sickening demonstration of just callousness and want and heavily not cannibalism but like heavily coded as cannibalism and just and impiety and like unholy restoration and unholy resurrection and necromancy. It is a pile of just awfulness and deeply messed up stuff. And Valerius catches on and says there's something unnatural about this man. But Corpse Hands doesn't hear him, which Corpse Hands definitely did hear him because Corpse Hands hears everything. We have scarcely seen a single thing which Corpse Hands didn't hear. So of course Corpse Hands hears Valerius, but doesn't mind. And then he runs to a nearby cupboard and finds honey gone to seed. So, but it is honey nevertheless. And he takes the honey, and he also has watered wine, and we have water, wine, and honey, which are the things that Iroh gives in sacrifice to his ancestors in Iroh 1, and here Corpse Hands is eating them for himself. So Corpse Hands is essentially deifying himself through the eating of offerings to himself. It's a lot. And then all beneath all this is the Burning Man's hand, this evocation of cannibalism. And then Corpse Hand slows. He has been, and then he says, "I thank you for this meal. We have no idea who you is. Is it the gods of the flame? Is this himself? Is this Ekkin? Is this some other power, possibly related to whatever we saw at the end of the prologue? We don't know." But rises gracefully like a bird bursting into flight. Corpse Hands has been restored to his power, and he is free upon the world. This is incredibly spooky. And this is we have work to do, and turns to Valerius and says, "One of your swords." With Valerius being the only member of the party so far who has deeply distrusted Corpse Hands, and yet Corpse Hands asks him for one of his swords. Valerius, of course, says, "No, absolutely not." And Corpse Hands doesn't mind, and they go out. And here we are in a city illuminated by red light. that Corpse Hands has been brought with the party. Corpse Hands has been restored to life, but they're still in hell. They're in the city of Dis, actually, which is a red city of red light, and there are crows. That there are crows, the spirits of the dead, which we saw at the beginning of the chapter. And then Corpse Hands points to different directions, but the idea of Corpse Hands pointing in one direction and pointing in another direction is evocative of a certain motif, if you would. But they go towards the western gate and immediately run into the guards, which is funny, but would suggest that Corpse Hand was lying when he knew the guard patrols. Maybe he didn't, or maybe he just didn't have his information correct in some way. And he says, Ekkin says, don't turn this way, and they turn. But the guards are actually Kertari, which is a group we will learn more about in due time, but they are from the Forlorn Homeland. To give a brief rundown, the Kertari were the original inhabitants of what is now the Mandate of Villand, and the Kertari, their homeland is forlorn. And now they are a people who work as mercenaries, some of them at least, and they fight. Valerius runs after the guards, and here in Ekkin 3, rather like in Ekkin 1 we had it sort of, but here in Ekkin 3 is the first true fight scene of the entire story, 100 pages in. And we have Ekkin fighting the captain with Bruno and Corpsens fighting the other four guards. And Ekkin, this guy is massive. He is a bull in frame, and he has a massive warhammer. This is totally not reference to something, but and Ekkin gets the idea of being hit and flying back and just being absolutely destroyed. And Ekkin is all right with a sword, but is nervous, and he misses the tendons. This is what Ekkin was aiming for, because if he hits the tendons, the guy can't wield his weapon anymore. And Ekkin ducks, but then gets backhanded by Ekkin in turn. This is like something like classic of a fight scene or classic of a fighting movie or video game or something like that, where if you go for the thing, they counter you and then they backhand you and then do another attack. And it actually, when I was recording the chapter, I laughed. I had to pause and like because I was laughing so hard at this for some reason. But Ekkin, the only thing that he has over this guy who's taller and stronger and fitter than him is his sword. His sword's stronger, and it's the only way he has to leverage it to win. And Ekkin doesn't. Ekkin is short. Ekkin is just a little bit below average height, but the guy he's fighting is like absolutely huge. So Ekkin lands a mortal blow on him, but the mortal blow isn't enough to kill right now, and Ekkin needs to end the fight right now, and he gets hit, but he falls to a knee. He falls to a knee rather than being hit all the way back, and they give a prayer to the god of wind and whispers, whatever that means. You'll see. Don't worry. And but Ekkin realizes he's too slow, but then, as a callback from earlier in the chapter, Bruno kills them with a blow to the neck. As I said, go for the head. Um, However, they get back up to help Corpse Hands, but Corpse Hands has already beaten the other three guards when Bruno had got helped Ekkin because he beat his guard. So Corpse Hands 3v1 guys, Corpse Hands who had spent 4 or 5 days in a prison cell with nothing to eat and was put a saber in his hands by Valerius right before Valerius ran off. And Corpse Hands has just soloed three guys. Like, what? And so we have this idea that, and Corpse Hands simply says they fought well, but not well enough. That I was better. That Corpse Hands is unnaturally good at fighting when he has the proper weapon. And this is spooky. And then Valerius sees Corpse Hands filling up his pile of bodies and just says, keep the sword. Because Valerius has been humbled, and Corpse Hand has proved that he is someone who isn't going to betray them. Notably, that's earlier when Corpse Hand asks which gate they're going to fight, which gate they're going to go through. Ekkin answers, Valerius doesn't answer because Valerius still doesn't trust Corpse Hands. Corpse Hands has now gained Valerius's trust in some way, with sufficiently proven that he's not going to turn on them. yet, at least, because if he was actually going to turn on them, he could have turned on them during the fight. So that's all for now. We will see how the rest of the siege plotline goes in Ekkin 4, but next time we're going over Lucian 3, which is um, a very interesting chapter, if you would. That's Lucian 3 actually takes place over the longest course of time, which takes place over the course of a couple days. That's because of all the other chapters which have taken the course of a couple minutes or hours. So we'll do that next time, and I will see you all there. Bye.